Absolutely. It's sort of as an introduction, refreshing everyone's memory. We provide shielding products to the marketplace, and we have a customer service organization that helps people understand sort of the complicated space of electromagnetic radiation. And so we're always a source for trying to better understand the environment. Well, actually, when we started, I literally answered the phone myself.
Mm-hmm.
And even back then, over 12 years ago or so, I'd have these people calling me and they'd say, I get headaches. My hands tingle. I get foggy thinking. There's a lot of things that I have as a result of what I believe is exposures in my environment. I sit right next to a router and I say, well, don't sit next to a router and you're going to get better. Well, it turns out that that's electric hypersensitivity. And electric hypersensitivity is sort of hard to diagnose. And doctors would say, you got a headache, take 2 aspirin and come back tomorrow and let me know how you're feeling. And it turned out that the headache was not related to another problem. It was somewhat systemic to the environment, particularly the exposures from RF. So we began getting more and more and more phone calls from hypersensitive people. And as you may recall, 80%, 20% of our population is electric hypersensitive. And of that, 80% of women. So most of the time I was getting these calls from women, and they'd say they go to the doctor and they didn't seem to get any resolution to some of the problems they had that they thought may be related to the exposures, which is of course true. So all of a sudden we began getting involved in, well, how can we fix that? And of course we try to produce products that help people in that environment, and we can help. And we can talk about how their environment is themselves in their house, and how you move devices away and keep distance between, and all the kinds of traditional things we suggest you do. And that works to an extent. But if you're electric hypersensitive, it may not go away. And in fact, it can get as extreme as where I know of clinics that have patients that literally come in a wheelchair that were driven by the environment they work, a very high exposure space for electromagnetic radiation. And it was that debilitating to them. So out of sheer frustration, I began looking into supplements. I believe there were certain characteristics that can be observed with those who are electric hypersensitive, and there were things we could do about that to help them recover from their environment, not just physically moving the equipment, but actually taking supplements that help. And so I started the journey probably 4 or 5 years ago, trying to figure out what I could find that I thought was the best products for the people we had contacting us. And my journey led me to experts like Dr. Prasad, a brilliant, brilliant man that was a biochemist and just a brilliant man. And he had gone after vitamins himself. And so I was hoping that maybe he could coach us on what we could maybe do and concentrate more on the electro hypersensitive. And then he had a protege, Jonette. She's a biochemist, and she works with Dr. EMF, or Dr. Court, who's on our board. And so I began asking them for coaching. What should we be looking for? And that journey ended up with us creating a company called Lightbody. And our first product was omega-3s. So why omega-3s? Well, it turns out that um, you probably heard of oxidative stress, right?
Right.
Which I hate because it's very, it's not definition of what's happening to the body.
Yeah, I tend to explain it every time it comes up on a podcast because I think people have heard it so much, but they don't exactly understand what it means.
Right. Yeah, right. It's a ratio of free radicals to antioxidants. Okay, what does that mean? It's like, what does it really mean? And that's why I actually began looking at Dr. Nabio's work. He's out of California, a brilliant biochemist, MD, and educator, and that's what his role was. And he goes far beyond a balance of antioxidants and free radicals. And he talks about the cycle of, he calls it cell danger response. He says when we're in an environment, the body gets hit with the toxin of some sort. A hammer could be a toxin to the body, but the cells themselves react the same way. They don't invent a different way to react with every different toxin that we find. So there are patterns you can look for that what he refers to as cell danger response. And he talks about it in a cyclic way. He says there's certain recovery times. And I think we may have talked a little bit about the sanctuary of the bedroom and the importance of it, because in the recovery cycle of a cell, you need to sleep. So you get that recovery cycle kicked in, so you recover for the day. So he thinks of cell recovery as cyclic. And he talks about basic fundamental things that need to occur in the body that will be effective at trying to help that recovery. And guess what? A very simple omega-3 was one of his suggestions. What's interesting about that, Jennifer, is that there really no real clean pure omega-3s. It turns out that there are very, very, very few that are considered clinical. Clinical is 96% or above. So most of them are cut with other stuff. So already it's being diluted. And it also is true that the recommended doses are underdosed. You can't overdose on omega-3. There are things that may occur that are temporary, but by and large, most of us can take triple the load. And that triple the load is now having the recovery that you're looking for that recovery cycle. And so you need as clean a product as you can get, the purest of product at the right dosage level. And then what you need to think about is how do they process the omega? And most omega products on the market, they heat it up. They boil the source materials. Oxygenation occurs almost immediately before you even started getting out, being bottled. So you're losing the essence, the quality of the product in the process. They also, most omega-3s use chemicals to separate the various elements of the source. And those chemicals, if you take your typical omega product and you put it in a styrofoam cup and you open it up and you drip it into the cup, the bottom of the cup will melt through. There's still a residual of those chemicals in the space. So you really do want to try to find the products that don't use chemicals to refine the product for bottling. So given all those things, I literally went all over the world. And I knew I needed to get a pure product. Nabio and the benefits I understood to some extent. I had good coaching from experts that would help me understand what I needed to look for. And believe it or not, I found it, believe it or not. And I was excited that we actually found a place. And Jennifer, it goes after inflammation most, right? Most disease is inflammation.
Yep.
That's simple, right? Alzheimer's is inflammation, and so it's one of those basic things that you go after. And that's what omega-3s, one of the most fundamental aspects of it. It goes after the inflammation of the body, and it renourishes the membrane of the cell. It literally.
Yeah, and I think that's what people need to, the big takeaway here is that that's what omega-3 does. It re-nourishes the cell. Last time we spoke, Daniel, you had told me that about Dr. Nabio, and I went and looked up his papers, and what I found was astonishing.
Yeah.
And I couldn't, every time I do a podcast and I talk to an expert like you, I'm always amazed at how little
Right.
this information has gotten out and explained to people. So, just so the audience understands, Dr. Nabio, who, as you said, created this cell danger response way of explaining what was happening to cells that get triggered, right? He was studying it in the context of chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yep.
And, the big debate, right, was always, oh, it's in your head. We can't find anything wrong with you. And what he proved in 2016 unequivocally was it was not in people's heads.
Right.
But there was an absolute trigger that was causing these cells to react, and he called that cell danger response, right?
Yep.
So, and like you said, one of the things you have to do is you have to stop that. So it's inflammation in the brain.
It's inflammation. It's simple.
Yes.
It's very basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
And its implication is so vast. And when my coaches sort of suggested looking at his work, it's like the modern science of medicine. It really is earth-shattering what the way he views the body and how it repairs. And he did studies where he used omegas, and he used other pharmaceutical stuff, which I don't particularly care for. And so we already know we had some starting point, and I know what he used wasn't very good stuff, and yet he found substantial improvement. So that was like the starting point of us for Light Body, and we found the source, we bottled the source, and we began offering it to the market very recently, actually. And so I got to tell you a story, Jennifer. We had a podcast we were talking about doing earlier in the year, in the new year, and it turned out that I actually fractured my hip in December, and I had to have a hip replaced. It was a pretty substantial fall I had. And so that was my excuse. Hopefully you believe me.
Yes, Hannah assured me not to panic, that you were okay, and that, you would be back to 100% soon. Yes, absolutely.
So listen to me. So I mentioned Dr. Court, and I also, we have on the board an amazing athletic physician. And he called me up, both of them called me up and said, triple your omegas. They knew I had the omegas, right? They said, right, triple the omegas. Now, I was taking 4 capsules a day.
Right.
And in our trials, I had arthritis as an example. My arthritis went away. Guess what? It's inflammation, right? And for me, my personal experience was, it really did work very effectively for me within a month. And I wasn't surprised, because it's very, very pure. There's trace elements of toxins, very little. And the source of the raw material lives less than a year in the ocean. so they don't accumulate toxins. So we basically went after as clean we can get. And so our laboratory experience, our testing experiences were good for me and many others. So here I was, I broke my hip, I got it replaced. They call me up and they say, look, triple it. Now I know in Europe that it's actually used in hospitals and in recovery, not in the US, but in other parts of the world. Pure omegas are more normally used in the health industry. So I tripled my doses, and of course you can't walk very well the first week, but believe it or not, by the third week I was walking without a crutch. I was walking out without any support. I was literally walking. I'm still sore, but I was walking within 3 weeks. That's sort of unheard of.
Yeah, I'm amazed. And so I have to comment two things. First of all, I do have your omega-3s and I love them. And I have to say, I love it. First of all, they go down really easy. I don't know what the capsule is that you've like made it from, but it's not like any supplement I've ever taken. It's amazing. It doesn't give you any kind of aftertaste, no fish, no nothing.
And that's because we're so pure. The purity really is why you don't taste it.
But here's the weird thing. I don't know if you believe in serendipity, but I do. But my mom was just telling me last week, I'm trying to just help her get into a more healthy lifestyle. Right. And she broke her hip last year.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And she just said to me 2 weeks ago, because I said, you have to start exercising, Mom. I don't care what it is. You have to get up every day and you have to try and just walk 30 minutes a day. Let's make that your goal. And she just sort of said, well, okay, but the doctor told me that my hip pain from the fracture, it's just never going to go away. So that's just something that I'm going to have to live with. She said this to me 2 weeks ago, Daniel. So I'm so glad you shared that story with me because, guess what I'm going to do?
Jennifer, it's literally true that it goes after inflammation. And every one of my, the people that we used before we made our decision on the product, particularly those who were above 50 years old, everyone found their pain reduced. All of us, we have one pain or the other. And it really was, to me, was sort of amazing that there was such response in such a small period of time. I did a clinical analysis as well with Dr. Court. And do you know what omega-3 testing is? Have you heard of that?
When you're testing yourself for?
No. There's actually a test in which they look at the fatty acids in your body.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's called omega testing. Omega testing is where you look at all the various fatty acids and look at the balances and all that kind of stuff. And it turns out that it implies, based on a lot of years of experience, that you improve your cardiovascular by finding increased elevations of your test score. There are many different kinds of body metrics it's looking at, and you can tell based on how you're performing on the level of the measure you have. The reason what I did is I had Dr. Court uses a whole population of his patients and start with a test where the omega test could be established before they took our omegas.
So as a baseline, just to see.
Yeah, just a baseline, right? Exactly. Okay. And I'm telling you, some of these people were really, really off the charts when we tested them. And so they ran 45 days, maybe it was 60 days, maybe. And then we did another omega test. And without a doubt, everyone improved. Everyone improved. Some substantial improvements. They're like when I was doing it, when I was doing the testing, my triglycerides, which were in the right space, I started taking the mega. They went down 15 points in 30 days. I wasn't even going after it, but I measured my triglycerides and I found it is even better spaced. So that's the cardiovascular implications.
Right. So that's interesting. I'm curious because, you know, when we start talking about omegas, I think sometimes people get confused between like omega 6s and omega 3s.
Yes. And then within omega 3s, there's EHA, DHA. There's different types. And so let's talk about that a tiny bit.
Yeah, because I think, what do I have? I have high DHA. That's the
right. Right. That makes you smarter. I can tell from the last time we spoke.
Totally. I'm totally smarter. But yeah. Explain to the audience.
Yeah.
What's the difference there?
So the body needs both. And if you have a good omega-3, you boost your omega-6. So I did not go after omega-6 for that very reason. I went after omega-3. And the DHA, the one you spoke of, tends to be more towards the head performance, and the EPA tends to be the body. So when I was going after the inflammation in my body, I was taking the EPA. And both, they overlap, but one tends to be more targeted after performance differences than the other. And so I've found that the EPA has driven my omega-6 up as I expected it to do. And it's just helping the body sort of balance out. And at the end of the day, there's fatty tissue being built on the cell itself, and the whole body's improving, as you were saying before. So we know from our own clinical studies, and we know from other independent studies that there's benefits in a lot of different ways. And I believe because of these purity of hours and the dosage, which is typically twice the recommended dose than most others, by the way, it really does change.
Well, I have to say I was surprised when I got these, like how high of a dose you recommend. You know, it's the 4 capsules, and you know, I was blown away by that. But and I was a little concerned too, right? Because I thought, oh my gosh, what if this upsets my stomach? Blah blah blah. But but it didn't.
Never did. Yeah, exactly. My brother would not touch an omega product because he took them once and he got sick on them.
Yeah.
And I said, you got to try this. And it was the impurities of the product that was making him ill, not the purity of the product. And the dosage, we could go higher. And that is at the edge of what's recommended by the FDA. So we're on the very high end. But remember, like, people that are selling stuff make more money when they sell less for more. We wanted to make sure we gave you enough of what you need at the best price we could provide. That's sort of what we try to do in the Defender Shield.
No, I agree. You know, it's just so hard for people to know what is high quality. That's what I'm looking for. I get questions all the time. Which vitamin brands do you take? Which ones are higher quality? Yeah. And, you know, I stick to like 2 or 3 brands that I'm pretty familiar with for that reason.
Yes.
But, you know, in terms of getting a cardiovascular benefit, I think that's huge. I think there's so much misinformation around omega-3s, fats, lipids. People don't want to touch the stuff because they think, oh, it's going to make my cholesterol go higher, or they just don't understand the relationships, and the physicians don't educate
No.
on LDL and HDL, and
right. And I'm not sure they know the difference either, Jennifer. I really don't think they do. And the triglyceride, I specifically went after the hemoglobin, the triglycerides. I went across a very long cross-sectional of testing so I could see the differences. And there was no question, there was clear evidence. But I can't stress enough, the most fundamental thing it goes after is inflammation. And we've seen consistent response by everyone who's used it. Not to say you're going to have that same experience, but it's certainly the evidence that we've seen is that what we set out to do actually seems to be working. And so we're pretty excited about it, only because we know it's a good product. And it goes after an electric hypersensitivity. It's inflammation so much, often the problem. And so we've seen, as I mentioned with Dr. Court, those who are electric hypersensitive had improvement. They became more resilient. It didn't fix the problem completely, but it helped them in their journey trying to deal with this environment we live in with all the toxins we have.
Yeah, I'd like to bring that back to tie this all together a little bit with Dr. Nabio, because when he was talking about that cell danger response, he initially listed out, I think, like 5 triggers, but number 5 was unknown, because I think at the time he realized that there was some unknown environmental trigger that he wasn't sure of. And really what it's come to show is EMF is one of those environmental triggers. And people can't see it. It's not tangible to them, so they don't think about it.
Jennifer, I always thought that Dr. Paul, a biochemist who talks about the calcium penetration of a cell from electromagnetic radiation, and the way it was presented, it was always the membrane weakens under the load. And when it goes to the point where it's too weak, calcium channel penetrates the cell. And when it goes into the cell, chemical stuff goes on inside, and the cycle becomes the cell mutates or it gets DNA damage. So that was the theory that everyone was talking about. When I began looking into this, I began realizing the membrane was weakened because it was in cell danger response. And as a result, some of the impacts are the fatty acids around the cell get reduced. That's what was breaking it down. It's not necessarily the pulsing itself. So in general, it's a good thing for our environment, no less electromagnetic radiation, because what it's doing is sort of helping you deal with your environment, whatever that may be, in areas that are most essential for the body.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because, the point is we're trying to acclimate the body to handling a higher level of stress, right? Before it starts to break down. And with the cell danger response, how it was explained to me was that what happens is the body suddenly decides it can't handle these stressors anymore, and it goes almost into like a hibernation mode.
Yes.
Right.
It is really instinctual. The body doesn't think about it. It just automatic responses to the environment. They're primeval almost, and it's primeval that you're trying to recover from, in a sense.
Right. And unfortunately, when you're in that hibernation mode, right, it shuts down all critical systems.
It does. I always use the analogy when you're in the freeze, freezing cold weather. The first thing that goes is the blood to the hands. The second thing is blood to the feet. The body is preserving itself. and it's trying to keep the core organs alive. That's literally what happens. Well, there's a similar reaction to our environment, and that's the way Nabio describes it. There's a sequence of stuff that goes on as a result of the toxin putting you into a state in which your body needs to shut down because there's too much stress related to what that is. And so there's no doubt that I love Nabio's work. I don't understand a darn thing he's talking about, but I have the biochemists who work with us try to help me understand this stuff, because I'm excited. It's the first time I personally understood really what the challenges were that the body was dealing with. And you made an interesting point. Your body's learning how to deal with it. It turns out it's the species has been trying to figure out, and it's only been around for 50 years, 75 years. The body itself, the human race is trying to figure out how to react to this kind of environment, as it is with the other toxins in our environment.
Well, and that's the problem, right? It's not just EMF, it's all the other.
It's all of it. It's all of it, right?
Right.
And all of it's creating conditions to the body that are new to the body.
You know what I find really fascinating about all this, Daniel, is, with the omega-3s, like you said, it's applicable, not only to, your business of, trying to help people prevent hypersensitivity reactions to EMF, but when you think about all of the neurodegenerative diseases, what they all have in common is brain inflammation.
Right. That's what it is. It's literally true. And we've actually done a study in Canada, and we found that a 15% improvement with Alzheimer's patients that are already in advanced states. So we know there are benefits for so many across the board, and it's going after inflammation. Yeah. And that's why I did it.
Well, and that's a particular interest to me, which is why I'm really into studying this, because my genomics shows that I have both genes, Alzheimer's genes. I got one.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I got one from each parent, so I have that worst profile. So if you talk to any straight geneticist, they will say, oh, well, you have pretty much 100% chance that you are going to get Alzheimer's at some point. And so, obviously being who I am and what I do for a living, which is medical research, is I've read everything there is to know about it, and understanding the preventive aspect. And what all of these dementia diseases have, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's Parkinson's, or just, straight vascular dementia even, is that inflammatory component. And it often has to do with nutrition.
Yes.
Based. And I don't know if you're familiar with, excuse me, Dr. Dale Bredesen's work in the Alzheimer's space.
No, I don't think I know.
Yeah, so he has actually been able to reverse. He's the only person that has ever been shown to reverse Alzheimer's completely. And he has a new book out detailing, what happened with the first 8 patients that he was able to reverse. But he has a whole prevention program now as well. And a lot of it has to do with, the nutritional supplements and boosting your, omega-3s. So that's why I find this to be so fascinating, because it all connects. Like one thing relates to,
no question,
to everything, as an umbrella.
So by the way, for true body recovery, you're right. It's so essential that you have a balanced diet with the nutritional values you need. I'll go even further and say within a window. There's a certain window which is cyclic that sort of correlates to the sleep cycle. And like if you eat too late, you don't quite sleep because your body's too warm. And so there's a cascading of problems you may have if you don't eat right and within the right windows. And then, of course, the sleep cycle is so critical. your mitochondrial repair, the cells repair. All of that occurs when you're sleeping. So if your melatonin is not at the right levels because you're reading tablets before you go to bed, takes 2 hours for you to get to sleep, your cycle is screwed up, and so is your recovery. So all of these things are in balance, as you were pointing out. You really got to balance it all. And omegas helps, but it won't fix the problem if you haven't fixed some of these other things. So we actually have looked at genes, and we 10 years ago believed genes were influential in how susceptible one person is versus another because of the predisposition to the exposures. And we actually have found those who have certain genes that make you potentially more negatively responded to than others. We've actually been able to reverse it, and it's because we worried about all the aspects of sleep, nutrition, and the right omegas, believe it or not, and the right multivitamins. So there's a lot of things they do, which includes our omegas, but there's other things they make sure that get done too. So it's all in balance.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, right? You have to look at everything kind of, holistically, and I think what you found out from your, genetic studies is what I have found out, which is, just because you are predisposed to something doesn't mean that you don't have the power to change it.
Absolutely.
Which I'm doing. So
absolutely.
It's just a blueprint, and your environment massively affects, how that gene is expressed, or whether or not it's expressed at all.
Right, exactly. So Yale did a study a few years ago on the pineal gland, and they found if you had this one particular mutated gene, a hereditary mutated gene, and there was excess fluoride, and there was an RF signal of 2.4 gigahertz, which a Wi-Fi delivers, you're 3 times more likely to have cancer within the pineal gland. So how do you fix it? Either remove the Wi-Fi or remove the fluoride, and you've recovered. You're not 3 times more likely to get cancer if you remove those other elements. And that's the point. We work with I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer with we have a multivariable problem. And as you're pointing out, remove some of the variability of it, and you're better likely to go to a path you want to go.
Yeah. And also I want to add to that you can't study one thing by itself. And, unfortunately, a lot of these studies, they don't look at the multiple variables. And so they only want to look at one thing, and only one thing, because otherwise it's hard to measure the impact of, each of the individual variables. But the problem is the body doesn't exist in vitro. I mean, you can't, we still don't even understand, the polymorphic characteristics of the blood in a human body, because it changes once you take it out of the body.
No question. And it's completely different after a certain period of time. So that is a truly very, very important point you're making. It turns out that it's multivariable, and you can help create a different path if you're aware of your body. A side note, I actually chose not to find an MD as my coach. I decided not to get a brain guy. I didn't get a food person. I didn't get any one particular experience or skill set because of the very problem you pointed out. They're myopic. They see their space, but they don't see the spaces around them. And that's where there was a flaw. In fact, that's how I got in this business. I found the scientific community wasn't talking to the engineering community and wasn't talking to the very public. No one was talking to anybody. And we had this problem where electromagnetic radiation was dangerous, yet no one knew. So I actually chose Jonette as my primary coach because she tries to go beyond the biological. She looks at the physiological. She looks at all the aspects of what comprises a human body. And that's why I think we've been able to find a more clear path where we wanted to go as a result.
Well, I love that you shared that with me because I struggle sometimes, because of what I do for a living. I work with very myopic physicians a lot of the time, or very myopic pharmaceutical companies who only look in their space and they only play in their space. And I've had to introduce the concept of the microbiome to a lot of them in the last couple of years because of the way it impacts potentially the disease states that they're playing in.
Right.
And, while for the most part, they've been open to understanding that because it is gaining, quote unquote, popularity, in medical speak. Unfortunately, when you talk to practicing physicians about looking, at the body as a whole, it's hard. And I would recommend that if you are somebody who is suffering from any chronic disease, whether it be EMF hypersensitivity or chronic fatigue syndrome or any autoimmune disease, get several opinions and get them from different types of specialists. I think one of the best things that ever happened in medicine was the idea of a multidisciplinary team approach to medicine. Because the GI guy, he knows the gut, right? But the neurologist knows the brain. But the problem is there's a whole lot of stuff that goes back and forth from the vagus nerve, from the gut to the brain that we're discovering, and they have to work together.
I'll give you an example. The predominant electric hypersensitive have DEF-C, which is
oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
it's
that.
in the gut. It can kill you at the too high levels. And we literally have a product that's going specifically at that growth that occurs, that's propagated because of exposures to RF signals. And it is the gut I'm going after because I know you can't recover from the mitochondrial recovery, what do you call it? The mitochondrial repair that occurs at night. It's coming from the gut. Your immune system's recovery is coming from your gut. So, like, if you're not sleeping, it could be your gut is the problem, not other things that may be influencing. And so, I absolutely agree with you. The gut is such a critical part of this, and it's never diagnosed. And it could be. I'm telling you, we in Dr. Court's clinic, every patient has their biome studied, every one, because of their belief of what kind of influence it has to the body. And they actually look at making prescription. They actually do prescription biome probiotic, and that for that very reason, because they try to balance it when they see imbalance. So very important point, Jennifer, you made. Very important.
Well, thank you. And again, I really appreciate you talking about this with me today because, I don't think that people think about electrical signals and, how just good nutrition or good supplementation it can affect that, right? And it's not about, the takeaway here is not, omega-3s are going to prevent you from being EMF hypersensitive. No, but it's going to help your body to combat the effects and recover from, those assaults. Along with a whole bunch of other things, right?
Exactly.
And as we mentioned, my mom will be going on these supplements for her.
I can predict that I'll tell you a story first, and then I'll predict what will happen. My brother fell and had a pretty serious accident years ago, and he had this persistent pain in many of the joints he had. and it was pretty serious, and it had gone on for years. In 30 days, when he took the omega, those irritating areas weren't irritating at all anymore. And so, like, he was a believer at that point. And so I would project that, and particularly because I know what she had as a hereditary stuff, that actually it will help her. She will feel the difference in 30 days because it's going after inflammation, and it finds it.
Right.
And in fact, you could go with 2 in the morning and 2 at night pills, but if you wanted to, you could increase it a little bit.
I was just going to ask you that. What did your brother do? Was he just doing the 2 in the morning, 2 at night?
He was 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, and he found the benefit. I take 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, but I also, when I had the operation, took 12 a day.
Right.
And I wouldn't recommend that for long term, but for short term impact stuff, 30 to 60 days, you're pretty comfortable and safe in doing that way. So she may want to take 6 for the first month and go back to 4.
Okay. And do you recommend the high DHA or the high EPA?
No, I would recommend her the EPA.
EPA. Okay.
Yeah, no question.
And that's the body and the cognitive is
right. Yeah, that's differentiation.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. As always, you have just been so illuminating, and you're just so wonderful to talk to, and just full of knowledge and wonder. I love that about you.
Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. I actually enjoyed you, but I enjoyed your son a little bit more than you.
Yeah, I know. I need to get him back on here, and
you're right, exactly,
and have him give you like the I would love for him to give you his presentation.
I'd love to hear it. Actually,
yeah. It's only a couple minutes long. Maybe I'll have to set that up. But
cool.
And anyway, but lovely speaking with you again. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for inviting me. You know, it's rare where I actually can have a conversation, and it's really a conversation with you. That's what we have, a conversation, and we share a lot when we're asking inquisitive questions about the subject we're talking about. So thanks again for inviting me, and I really much enjoyed the time.
Thank you. And once again, people can check out your light body omega-3 supplements on defendershield.com. You have a supplement page section there.
Yes.
And they can find you on Instagram as well at Defender Shield. All right, great. Well, thanks again, Daniel.
Thanks so much. You have a good day.
Thanks. Wow, that was.
So I'm glad you looked at Nabio's work. Very few people look at it. You know, they don't realize how it's profound. Yeah.
Like, it applies to so many things.
Right.
You know, like I said, I'm really into Alzheimer's research, just obviously because like I'm supposedly doomed, but I don't believe that.
Yeah, I don't believe it either.
Yeah, and because you know they say most people would have started showing symptoms by my age already, and I've had I've had a brain scan and other cognitive tests that show me that not only do I have any deficiencies, but I am literally like off the charts. Like my brain function is like that of a 10-year-old still.
Wow.
So, you know, I don't know if it's because of what I do every day that I'm
you're active. You're always learning, right?
You know, always learning. And then, you know, plus, you know, I make my kids play the piano. So we all play the piano, you know, in terms of keeping up, you know, neuroplasticity and stuff. But, you know, I think having made the nutritional switch a couple of years ago probably is one of the reasons why. I absolutely think so.
You needed to do it. And that we toil with it, trying to understand what he's actually saying. It gets really, really, as you know, if you've read some of his work, it gets really, really complicated for us. But if we pay attention to what he's saying, we can find ways of doing what he is observing and doing something about it.
Yeah, it's hard though. And, like I mean, I get pushback all the time, from physicians because I'm not a physician, and
Right,
therefore, I don't know what I'm talking about.
right,
But I mean, they will push back on anything that they don't understand.
right,
And almost no one understands this stuff unless you like live and breathe it and read
right.
and keep current. I mean, they're still arguing about salt. you
Well,
know,
one of the things we have is I mentioned the name Dr. Prasad. He's like an 80-some-year-old guy that's written the most complex book. He found the cure for not cure. It's for Parkinson's.
mm,
L-Dopa.
L-Dopa. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the one who invented it, and
Oh, wow.
so
I actually just finished updating modules for a new treatment for Parkinson's disease that targets the adenosine receptors instead of the dopamine
yeah,
receptors to be used in combination with L-Dopa.
yeah. Actually, you should talk to him. I'll tell you the source. I mean, brilliant, brilliant man, and so he's watching what we're doing, knowing we're trying to break the pattern of how you look at things to bring patients recovery.
Well, I think it's all related. I honestly think that the difference between somebody getting, Parkinson's, or some other type of dementia is how their immune system
Right.
handles things. And I mentioned Dale Bredesen. He's the main physician that is working on Alzheimer's, but he himself has said he thinks that the protocols that he's developed work on any type of dementia because they are nutritional based. They're helping the body heal itself,
Yeah.
predict,
No.
protect itself. So yeah.
Well, actually, Dr. Court has found serious improvements with in vitro 80 um, kids who came out of the womb with serious limitations. And he's gone to the basics of the body and he's improved those basics. And where an autistic child couldn't communicate, they now communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going back to fundamental stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
that's fascinating. All right.
yeah.
Well, great. Always a pleasure talking to you. And I definitely will look up Dr. Prasad. You said he's
Yeah,
on your.
Dr. Prasad.
Is
No,
he on?
he's not on our board.
He's not.
He's a friend of Jonette's. She's the one on our board.
Well, I'll still because he's the creator of L-Dopa, so I'll find
Yeah,
him.
he's the creator of L-Dopa. Yeah, he did it in Sunnybrook, New York, Long Island, New York. He Brookhaven Labs at the time.
Gotcha. So, well, that's interesting. Always learn something new every day.
There you go.
All right. Well, hey, have a great rest of your day, and I will definitely be in touch.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful day too.
Bye, Danielle.
Okay, bye.